We've all heard tales of families with dark secrets, hidden away in lonely houses. But there's a story from the hills of Kentucky that's colder than most. A story that starts after a war and ends in a shallow grave. It's about a family that built a wall around itself, not with stone, but with blood and fear. 1868. A young woman runs out of a dark valley, holding a baby. She tells a story to the law. A story of 5 generations. 5 generations of incest, of children born different, and of a terrible sacrifice to a god of their own making. This is the story of the Bell family, what they did, and how their secrets finally came into the light. If you value documented history from the forgotten corners of the world, subscribe. It's the best way to support this work. And let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. This account is built from court records, witness depositions, and local archives from Pike County, Kentucky. Now back to the story. It begins not in 1868, but 96 years earlier. The year is 1792. The American Revolution is over. Men are pushing west, looking for land, for a new start. One of these men is Jebediah Bell. He's not like the others. He's not looking for a community. He's looking for an ending, an end to the world he knows. He finds it in a narrow, dark valley in eastern Kentucky, a place the maps don't even name yet, a place that will one day be called Crow's Beak Hollow. He has a land grant for 200 acres of rock and timber, signed by the governor. He brings his wife, Mary, and a wagon with an axe, a rifle, and a Bible. Within a year, Mary is dead. Childbirth. The baby lives. A girl. He names her Elspeth. And for the next 13 years, Jebediah and Elspeth Bell see almost no one. The nearest settlement is a 3-day walk. He works the land just enough to survive. He reads the Bible, but he reads it his own way. He sees commandments that aren't there. He sees justification for what he is about to do. In 1806, a traveling preacher named Silas Lee writes in his diary about finding the Bell homestead. He calls it a place of unnatural quiet. He writes, "The girl, a woman now, would not meet my eye. The father spoke only of wrath and purification. He left quickly. He did not know that Elspeth was already pregnant with her father's child." The first generation of the Bell family's new world had begun. The foundation wasn't built on faith. It was built on a sin that would poison the bloodline for a century. The second generation was born in that poison. Elspeth had 4 children by her father, Jebediah. 2 boys, 2 girls. They grew up knowing only the hollow, only their father's strange religion, and only each other. When Jebediah died in 1827, his oldest son, Cain, took his place. Cain was his father's son in every way. He believed the outside world was a sea of damnation. He believed the Bell blood was special, chosen, and he believed it must be kept pure. So he married his sister, Martha. His brother married the other sister. The circle was closed. The 1830 census for the county is a strange document. It lists the Bell household. It shows 1 adult male, Cain Bell. Then it lists the others not by name, but by description. Woman Bell, boy Bell, 7 children are listed. Already, the world outside was forgetting their names. But inside the hollow, something was going wrong. The children of the second generation were different. One was born with a 6th finger on each hand. Another had eyes that were milky white, unseeing. A girl had a spine that twisted her body into a permanent curve. To Cain, these were not mistakes. They were signs, marks of their special status. He taught his children that their bodies were a testament to their separation from the fallen world. Outsiders were a threat. In 1841, a hunter named Josiah Sutton tracked a bear onto Bell land. He was met by Cain and his 2 sons, all holding rifles. Sutton later told the sheriff in Pikeville that their eyes were like a snake's, all one color. He said they didn't speak in full sentences, just hisses and threats. "Ours," they said. "Bloodland." The sheriff logged the complaint but did nothing. The hollow was too far. The Bells were too strange. The family was left alone, to let their secrets fester and grow. They were no longer just a family. They were becoming a tribe with its own laws, its own God, and its own unforgivable sins. Accused, tried, silenced. The third generation faced a terrible choice. The marks were getting worse. By the 1840s, under the rule of Cain's son, Silas, fewer and fewer children were born healthy. Most did not live past their first year. The babies were born with cleft palates so severe they could not feed. Some had heads swollen with water. Some were born with their organs on the outside. The family's belief in their own purity was breaking. Silas Bell, a man forged in isolation and dogma, found a new answer in his grandfather's Bible. He decided this was a test from God. The sin of their bloodline had to be paid for. A sacrifice was required. He declared a new law in the hollow. Any child born with a grievous mark, too broken to survive, was not to be mourned. It was to be returned to God. It was a clean word for a dirty thing: murder. The first sacrifice was his own son's child, born in the winter of 1851. The baby was small, with a hole in its back. Silas took the child himself. He walked to a rocky outcrop behind the smokehouse, a place they now called the altar. He came back alone. This became the way. The women of the family would give birth in a small, windowless shack. The older women would inspect the baby. If it was deemed unfit, it was taken from the mother. The mother never saw it again. In 1858, a young doctor named Amos Fry set up a practice in Pikeville. He heard whispers of the strange family in the hills. When a frantic boy from a neighboring farm came to get him, saying the Bell woman was dying in childbirth, Dr. Fry made the 6-hour ride. He was stopped at the edge of the Bell property by two men with long beards and identical, pale blue eyes. They held rifles. They told him he was not needed. As he argued with them, he wrote in a letter to the sheriff, "I heard a weak cry from the cabin, then a sudden silence, terrible, final silence." The sheriff received the letter. He filed it away. The Bells were a problem no one wanted to solve. Inside the hollow, a small family Bible kept the records. It listed the births of Silas's grandchildren. But for at least 4 of them, next to their names, the space for a death date was left blank. They had simply ceased to be. If you appreciate stories that uncover the hidden parts of history, please subscribe and click the bell. It's the only way to make sure you see our future investigations. We are completely independent, and this channel is funded by viewers like you. This history is based on local Kentucky archives and the sealed court records of the Bell trial. Now back to the story. The 4th generation came of age during the Civil War. The war between the states barely touched Crow's Beak Hollow. To the Bell family, it was just another rumor from the sinful world outside. The patriarch was now Reuben Bell, a hard, silent man who had watched his own father, Silas, carry babies to the altar. He had married his sister, Lydia. The family's rules were as fixed as the mountains around them, but the world was getting closer. In the summer of 1864, a Union Army patrol passed through the area, hunting for deserters. A sergeant and 2 privates from the 39th Kentucky Infantry left their main camp to scout the ridges near the Tug Fork River. They were never seen again. A year later, a trader in West Virginia bought 3 Army-issue rifles and a saber from a man he described as wild-eyed and smelling of wood smoke. The man didn't want paper money. He demanded silver coin. No one ever connected the sale to the missing soldiers. The Union Army listed them as deserters. But in the hollow, the Bells had 3 new rifles, and they had a renewed belief that the outside world brought only death. But something else was happening that threatened their world more than any army. In 1865, Lydia gave birth to a daughter. They named her Sarah, and Sarah was different. She was born perfectly healthy. As she grew, it was clear she was also intelligent, curious, and sharp. She learned to read from a stolen schoolbook she found near a stream. She started to ask questions. Why did they have to stay in the hollow? Why couldn't she talk to the people from the other farms? Why did some babies get taken to the altar and never come back? Her questions were met with silence or with anger. She was the first Bell in 3 generations to look at their world and see that it was wrong. She was a flaw in their perfect isolation, a crack in the wall, and she was about to bring the whole thing crashing down. The fifth generation was born into a reckoning. The year is 1868. Sarah Bell is 17 years old. She is a prisoner in her own home, watched constantly by her father Reuben and her uncles. Her mother, Lydia, is pregnant again. Sarah knows what this means. It's a roll of the dice. If the baby is healthy, it lives. If it has the mark, it dies. Sarah makes a plan, a desperate one. She will not let another baby be carried to the rocks behind the smokehouse. On the night of October 10th, Lydia goes into labor. The birth is hard. Sarah is forced to help. At dawn, the baby is born, a boy, but as he takes his first breath, they see it. A cleft palate. Not severe, but it is there. The mark. Reuben, her father, looks at the child with no emotion. "It is God's will," he says. "Take it." Sarah acts. She grabs the newborn, wrapped only in a thin blanket, and runs. She runs out of the birthing shack, past the main cabin, past the smokehouse, and into the woods. She can hear her family shouting behind her, but she does not stop. For 2 nights and a day she runs. She follows streams, sleeps in ditches, and keeps the baby warm against her own body. She covers a distance of 20 miles, a journey over rough terrain that should have been impossible. On the morning of October 12th, a sheriff's deputy named Eli Vance is riding the road to Pikeville. He finds a young woman collapsed by the side of the road. She is covered in mud and scratches. Her feet are bloody, and she is clutching a tiny, starving infant. It is Sarah Bell. She tells him everything. The story is so monstrous, so unbelievable, that at first he thinks she's insane. But he sees the terror in her eyes, and he sees the baby in her arms. He takes them both back to town. The sheriff listens to Sarah's story. He gathers a posse of 12 men. They are armed and ready for a fight. They ride for Crow's Beak Hollow. When they arrive, the Bell family is waiting. They do not surrender. They open fire from the windows of the cabin. The fight is short and brutal. Reuben Bell is shot and killed on his own porch. The other men, seeing their patriarch fall, give up. The posse enters the cabin. The inside is dark, filthy, and bare. The remaining family members, numbering 9 in total, are gaunt and look almost identical, with the same pale eyes and flat expressions. They do not seem to understand what is happening. The posse then follows Sarah's directions. Behind the smokehouse, near a pile of rocks, they start to dig. They don't have to dig deep. They find the bones of one baby, then another, and another. In the end, they unearth the remains of at least 10 infants. The trial of the Bell family was a sensation, but the records were quickly sealed. The surviving members, 8 of them, were brought to the courthouse in Pikeville. They were confused by the proceedings. They did not believe they had done anything wrong. They were following God's law, the law of their family. A doctor who examined them found numerous physical ailments: fused fingers, curved spines, partial deafness. He concluded they were the product of generations of inbreeding, with a profound ignorance of the civilized world. There was no execution. There was no long prison sentence. The court declared them civilly dead, a rare legal term meaning they had no rights, no property, no existence in the eyes of the law. They were sent to the Eastern State Lunatic Asylum in Lexington, where they lived out the rest of their lives, far from the hollow that had been their entire world. Sarah Bell, the girl who escaped, was given a new name and sent to live with a church family in another state. The baby she saved, named John by the sheriff's wife, was adopted. The story of Crow's Beak Hollow was officially over. The land was sold. The cabin fell down. The forest grew back. But that is not the end. In 1998, more than a century later, a construction crew was widening the highway that ran near the old Bell land. A bulldozer cut into a hillside and uncovered human bones. The police were called. Archaeologists arrived. They found a small, unmarked cemetery. But these were not the graves of infants. The skeletons were adults. Forensic analysis dated them to the early 1800s. One was a woman, maybe 30 years old, her skull crushed by a heavy object. 2 others were men killed violently. The dates matched the time when Jebediah Bell, the founder, was living in the hollow with his daughter. The evidence suggests a new, darker beginning to the story, that Jebediah's isolation wasn't just chosen, it was enforced, that perhaps a nosy neighbor, a lost traveler, or even his own wife had to be silenced to protect his first, terrible secret. The hollow doesn't just hide sin, it digests the bone.